Hello and welcome to this video. This video is going to be an appreciation of one of my favourite drummers of all time, Terry Bozzio. I grew up listening to the sort of classic 70s fusion drummers like Steve Gadd and Billy Cobham, Lenny White. At some point I became very interested in Frank Zappa. We have two videos on this YouTube, if you're a Zappa fan, one where I go through all the albums, or all the albums he made when he was alive at least, and another where I rank my favourite 10 albums. One album that really introduced me to Frank Zappa was this one, Shake Your Booty. Here we go. And this one also introduced me to the incredible Terry Bozzio. Terry Bozzio for me is not a fusion drummer, he's not a prog drummer, he's not a pop drummer, he's not a rock drummer, but he's all those things as well. He's also a very experimental drummer, he's an avant-garde drummer, he's done absolutely everything. When I heard Terry Bozzio, it opened the doors for me in terms of what I thought a drummer could do. Right, so let's start with Frank Zappa. So I've pulled out some albums. Well, I've just gone through my collection. I have a lot of Terry Bozzio here, a hell of a lot. And I've just gone through and pulled stuff out, so I haven't got it all. I haven't got every single album I've got with Terry Bozzio on, but I pulled out some. So yeah, this is a fantastic place to start. You know, it's got some fantastic Terry Bozzio drumming. It's classic 70s Terry Bozzio. Every era of Terry Bozzio is different. You know, so Terry Bozzio, when he emerges in the Zappa band, he's sort of like a Billy Cobham style drummer, sort of like a Tony Williams style drummer, but I think he's really got a sound of his own, and I think it's got a lot to do with the way he plays double bass drums and the way he plays those with cymbals and the way he plays around the kit. He tunes his drums in a particular way. There's a certain sound, and I think what differentiates him to a lot of fusion drummers is he's aggressive, almost like a heavy metal drummer. In fact, if you looked at the metal drummers around at the same time as Terry Bozzio in the 70s, he's actually pioneering a more vicious way of playing the drums. And that's all on here. Plus we get Terry singing and we get the whole personality. Of course, there are a number of albums that you need to get. You know, I pulled out this, of course. This is Zappa in New York. Here's my vinyl version of it with Punky's Whips on, which is the song that's sung, if you can see it there. Oh, I'll never get this. There we go, Punky's Whips. This is the album that was banned, the actual vinyl album. Although I think this is a fake. This one here. That's another video. We get into this stuff, but of course this has the black page on. The most difficult drum part of all time. Terry Bozzio was the first to play the black page. You know, what a drummer. You know, there he is in his 20s, being given what is possibly the hardest drum part ever. And he was the first guy to record it. Of course, there's kids in their bedroom playing it now. If you really want to check out Bozzio with Frank Zappa, go for that. Leather. I've talked about this on my top 10 Zappa albums, but this contains a lot of the stuff, including all of In New York. It's got like all the stuff he did on Sleep Dirt. It's got an amazing amount of stuff. That and the Shake Your Booty would do it, I think. But if you want to go further out, I would say check out, and there's Terry there, where he is. There's Terry. That's the first album he did with Zappa. This could well be, I think, the first album he ever did, or definitely the first mainstream album. This is not top-notch Zappa. It's very, very good Zappa. This is not a masterpiece, but it's some fantastic stuff, and Terry's great on it. But I felt with Zappa, one of his great drum performances with Zappa that doesn't get the credit it should, is the soundtrack to Baby Snakes. All right, his drums just sound astonishing on here. He's playing live. It's vicious. It's absolutely incredible. His drumming on Punky's Whips on this towards the end is just unbelievable. And that's one that never gets mentioned because it's a soundtrack to the film. If you can watch the film, you'll see Terry Bozzio in full 70s action. So he leaves Zappa around about 1978, and he does two things that I want to draw your attention to. One of them is he makes a couple of the greatest progressive rock albums ever with some of the greatest progressive rock drumming, and he makes one fusion album that I think contains some of the best jazz fusion drumming ever. So let's do the prog rock first. Right, I've covered this band a number of times. right? A number of times this band's been covered on here, and I'm always covering the first album. Of course, we're talking about UK. So UK came out in 1978 with a self-titled album. Alan Holdsworth, Bill Bruford, John Wetton, Eddie Jobson. After that, they reformed and made this second album here, Danger Money. Now, for my money, this is equal to the first album. I know a lot of people would not agree. I think this is a fantastic progressive rock album. It's definitely one of the best late 70s progressive rock albums ever made, I would say. Absolutely unique sound. Terry Bozzio is absolutely killing on here, especially on Carrying No Cross, where he does this pattern in 15, and it really opened my eyes and ears to the way to play time signatures, because he's playing it polyrhythmically. He's got symmetric modulation going there, so he's sort of got this 5 against 15 feel. Absolutely incredible. There he is on the back. This is a fantastic album. Those of you who approach this expected IQ and Alan Holdsworth, you're going to be let down. You have to take this album as it is, but this is a fantastic progressive rock album. They also made UK Live, Night After Night. This is the absolutely great album. It's got live versions of Presto Vivace, which is really ridiculously hard drumming on there. There's some fantastic stuff in here. Here's the back of the album. So I would say these two albums here have been blueprints for me in how to approach progressive rock drumming. Of course, there's the classic performances by Bruford and Phil Collins and, you know, and all the Gentle Giant, you know, John Weathers and all that stuff. I grew up with all that. But often when I was making progressive rock albums, I was thinking of the performances on here, especially that one. You know, that was really, I really wanted to sound like that. Bozzio does some of the best progressive rock drumming ever on that album. He also bizarrely drops into the Brecker Brothers. Now, I love the Brecker Brothers, okay? I've got all their albums here, right? I absolutely love the Brecker Brothers. Which is my favourite Brecker Brothers album? It's this one. Why? Because when Terry Bozzio comes in and plays on it, he just kicks them so hard up the arse. It's unbelievable. And up there he is, as a young Terry there, right? This is live as well. This is some brutal jazz fusion drumming. Again, Terry comes in and, for me, redefines jazz fusion drumming on here. Really does. In the early 70s, we had some brutal drummers like Billy Cobham, Lenny White. And then towards the end of the 70s, especially with bands like the Brecker Brothers, it became all very disco-y and funky, you know, that sort of much more, you know, pockety type of way of drumming. And then Bozzio comes out with this and just brutalises the band and pushes Brecker and, you know, Brecker Brothers to some of the best solos ever. I'm sure if you go back to my top 10 drum performances of all time, this will be in there. So, 70s Bozzio. We've talked about 70s Bozzio. Where are we going to go next? Right. So, in the early 80s, and this is the thing I love about Terry, rather than just becoming the prog or fusion drummer that he was destined to be, he goes and forms this band. All right? Missing Persons, with his wife Dale. This is sort of electro pop music, right? But the drumming's incredible. He's doing something else. He's pushing the envelope here, Bozzio is. He's really, you know, taking the drums and going into the 80s in a way which is really, really interesting. Really exploring industrial sounds, electronic sounds. This is an EP. And I think it's just called Missing Persons. It's got Words, Destination Unknown, I Like Boys, and Mental Hopscotch. This is great. I prefer the earlier Missing Persons. I've got quite a few here. This one here is Spring Session M. All right. You can see this is very glitzy pop music. Don't expect any jazz fusion Mavish Nocture here, but the drumming is very interesting. We got Noticeable Ones, a fantastic track. Destination Unknown's fantastic. End of side one on here. He does US Drag. I think US Drag is my favourite drum beat ever. It's linear drumming on there. And when I heard it, that was a mind-warping thing to try and get my head around that beat. It's in 6. it's linear, and I eventually did nail it. I learnt it, and it was a real learning experience for me. I owe a lot to Terry Bozzio. I've taken a lot from him over the years. You know, these albums are very electro pop albums, you know, but when you check out the drums, there's some incredible drumming on here. The music at the time when I was listening to this, I wasn't so keen on. Going back to it now, you could actually hear how influential these albums were. I don't know if Lady Gaga is aware of these albums, but to me, I can hear a similarity to her. And here's the sort of, I think this is the last album. It's one of these albums, I don't know which, you could hold it up any way you like. It's called Colour in Your Life. Terry's really going for that gated reverb, electronic drum sound, sort of really processed sounds on here. Not so keen on this one. But the songwriting's very good on here. But anyway, The Missing Persons, I did want to cover them on my channel at some point, and I just have done so. So where do we go next? Right, so, Session. Right, I've pulled out a couple of interesting session albums. I'm trying to be as different as I can. So, Bozzio through the 80s was doing a lot of sessions. You know, I think he played for Mick Jagger at some point. He played for Blondie. I've got those albums. I'm a real Terry Bozzio freak. But I've pulled out three really different ones. So the first is, he did some sessions for Dweezil Zappa. He plays on 3 tracks on here. This is good rock music, you know, and he does some great rock drumming on here. And you hear that sort of signature, you know, Terry Bozzio sound. So that's a great album. If you really want to hear him in rock mode, and I couldn't find it in my collection, but it's in there somewhere, it would be Sex and Religion by Steve Vai. That band with T.M. Stevens and Devin Townsend is an incredible band, and there's some really brilliant Terry Bozzio isms on there. And I think that's the sort of last we hear from Terry on that album in terms of rock drumming. But here I've pulled out, this is a Mark Isham or Isham. People are now criticising me for pronouncing people's names wrong. You know, a lot of these musicians, I haven't even read their names on an album. I've never heard them being said anyway. Mark Isham, I think it is. This is very ethereal jazz rock fusion, very sort of influenced almost by like bands like Japan and Brian Eno. It's that type of stuff. There's a couple of tracks on here where Terry Bozzio actually solos, but in a very delicate way. So Terry can play very delicately, you know, very atmospherically, and he can also rock out like a thrash metal drummer. And what you get is that delicate sound here. That 80s rock sound, the gated reverb sound, I don't think anyone has ever taken it further out than Terry on this. Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop. No bass player, just Jeff Beck, Tony Hymas, Terry Bozzio. This drum sound is unbelievable. I think it was engineered by Leaf Masses, was it? Who I think did a lot of the Zepp stuff. And it's basically the sound they got as, I think, natural reverb. It's been gated. It's quite incredible. It can be a bit much, but Terry, it just shows you that experimentation thing you get with Terry. Right, so jazz fusion fans, I know you're out there. So let's have a look at the later period jazz fusion albums and see what is of interest there. So. Here's a band he had with Steve Stevens and Tony Levin. Okay, I like this. It's not my favourite Bozzio. Sometimes I think Steve Stevens is a little bit out of his depth with these people. He's a fantastic guitarist, but he's a rock guitarist, and whether the vocabulary is there to really play with these guys, Bozzio is great on this. But of the sort of, this isn't recent, but of the sort of more recent-ish fusion stuff Bozzio does, that is interesting. If you want to go up to something which is absolute masterpiece, then Polytown, David Thorne, Mick Karn, Terry Bozzio. This is an absolute masterpiece, really is. And it's fusion, but fusion in an, you know, I really like when musicians are pushing the envelope. I don't know whether that's happening so much in jazz fusion at the moment. But back then, this is probably nearly 30 years old, I think, this album. But back then, this is jazz fusion, but it doesn't sound like Weather Report, it doesn't sound like Chicory's Electric Band, it doesn't sound like the Mavish Structure. They are forging new ways of you know, performing music which mixes jazz and rock music, and they're also mixing it with ambient music, electronic music. 3 master musicians here, and this is an absolutely fantastic album. But my favourite of the sort of more recent Terry Bozzio, when we say more recent, 30 years ago as opposed to 45 years ago, would be the Lonely Bears. I've got all 3 albums, I couldn't find them all, so I've just pulled out 2. They're all absolutely brilliant. I think this one's, which one's Injustice is my favourite one, and it's got the best Bozzio stuff on there, especially March Past 29145749B. The opening track on there, Terry, is at his best. This one's fantastic. The first album, which is called Lonely Bears, is also fantastic. If you don't know this band, check them out. They sound like nothing else in the world. They've got basically Tony Hymas from Jeff Beck's band on keyboards, again, no bass player, Terry on drums. You got Hugh Burns on guitar, which I think is George Michael's guitarist, you'll have to check that out. And then the jazz legend Tony Coe on sax. Such an interesting group of musicians. Shouldn't work, but it does. Doesn't sound like any other fusion, you know, or jazz rock around. They're really doing their own thing. You know, they're putting on a lot of folk tunes. Terry's doing his thing. He sounds fantastic on it. I cannot recommend this band anymore. If you're interested in the Lonely Bears, there's actually a video on YouTube now of them playing. I think it's the Montreux Jazz Festival, so you can check out their style right now. Okay, so what's Terry Bozzio doing now? Well, the last few years he's been really exploring solo drums. You know, his drum kit has expanded now, where he can play melodically on it. His drums are tuned. He can use ostinatos to create pedals to play over, modal pedals, and he can change those modal pedals. You know, when a lot of people see that massive drum kit, they laugh. They don't understand what Terry's doing. I've got a couple of albums here. One is his own chamber works, where he plays with sort of like a classical musical ensemble. I think the classical music is programmed, it's MIDI, but it's pretty good. It really shows another side to Terry. And of course, Drawing the Circle. This is an album of solo drum music. Absolutely incredible. Right, I'm going to finish up with a story. In 2005, I played Drumfest. Now you got to remember, I'm one of the biggest Terry Bozzio fans on the planet, and I got to play Drumfest. Here is the lineup, right? So you can see me up here, top right. There's me, and you can see down here is Terry Bozzio, along with Adrian Erlison from Cradle Fills, my old mate Russell Gilbrook, the great Kenny Aronoff, the great Greg Bisnett, the great Thomas Lang, and Jimmy Chamberlain from Smashing Pumpkins. This was a hell of a gig to do, but I think the most incredible thing for me was being able to play on the same bill as Terry Bozzio. Jimmy Chamberlain from Smashing Pumpkins is also a big Terry Bozzio fan, and we got taken back to meet him and talk to him, and that was an incredible thing. But when I was playing this, it took a day to set up Terry's kit, right? So when I came to sound check my drums, they were still setting it up, and I was the first on. I was on the lowest on the bill, so I was first on, so I was the last to sound check. So they just got to the point where they'd fixed Terry's kit. And so Terry came on to check it out. So I'm sound checking, playing a basic groove, and Terry comes on and he starts to play over the top of me. Now, whether he was playing with me or not is a contentious issue. In my mind, that day, I got to play with Terry Bozzio. And he started playing stuff over the top of my grooves, and I just held these grooves on, you know, going, oh my God, I'm playing with Terry Bozzio. As he was playing the drum solo over the top of my stuff, I went, I know this, but how can I know it? I know what this is. And I started to try and work out what it was. And what he was playing was one of the melodies from Bitches Brew by Miles Davis, right? He was playing that over what I was doing. And when I realised that was what he was doing, I was floored. He was playing a melody by Miles Davis on the drums. Right, so Terry Bozzio, one of the great drummers, an utter individual. You know, it's always put creativity to the fore. He's so identical, you can recognise him straight away, even though he can go from out and out pop music to like metal to prog to fusion to electronica to like ambient and even to solo drums. He's been such an influence on this, you know, scene and such an influence on me. So that's my little tribute to Terry Bozzio. That's my appreciation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be coming back and doing this for some other drummers as well. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.